complaint fairly and transparently. And efficiently, aiming to improve services based on patient feedback. Resolving a complaint informally is usually the best way, but sometimes that isn't possible, and that's when the complaints charter comes into play. I've worked for Healthwatch for about 6 years now, and the complaints charters had just been, the first complaints charters had just been drafted at the time that I started. So at that time, the structure of the NHS was that we had City and Hackney CCG. About 3 years ago, the CCGs were merged, and we now have North East London Integrated Care Board. And this has led to some changes in the way that complaints are handled. For example, pharmacy complaints now go to the NEL Integrated Complaints Board. There's also been changes around who deals with advocacy in Hackney. So it's now Rethink, but previously it was provided by the Advocacy Project. So all these changes mean that we've had to update the charters and making sure that all the information is up to date and it's all being signed off by the relevant parties has taken a bit longer than we'd anticipated. We're very proud of the charters. Not all ICBs have charters, and I think that they provide a really good guide to help residents to understand how to complain, the response that they can expect, and enable greater accountability and a positive relationship with service providers. So the digital versions are all on our website now, and we're going to get some printed copies produced very shortly, and those printed copies will be distributed to dentists, GP surgeries, Homerton Hospital, you know, all the places that you might like to find them.
Thank you, Catherine. We've heard from Catherine, Executive Director, Deputy at Healthwatch Hackney. We are now going to hear from Dawn about NEL ICB complaints. And I do have your PowerPoint, Dawn, so I am going to share my screen for you now. There you go. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes, but it needs to be put on, yes.
There you go. I think there's a bit of delay. Over to you, Dawn. Thank you. Dawn, I'm not sure if it's me, but we cannot hear you. No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yeah, sorry. So I apologise about that. So sorry. So I'm just going to talk to you about the changes to primary care complaints since July last year, and what that means for the options for the public. So currently, under the complaint regulations, patients can have the opportunity to who they make a complaint to. So you can either make it complaint directly to the provider, so our GPs, dentists, pharmacists or opticians, or you can complain to the commissioner, which is NHS North East London, for Hackney. Patients can't complain to both, they can only complain to one of the organisations, and whatever one you go through will put you through, obviously, into the complaints procedure. So I've left the contact details of how to contact the team if anybody wants to contact the Commissioner. And obviously these are in the public domain as well for people to be signposted onto, like on via our website, if people contact you and ask for information on how to complain. I think I can go on to the next slide. So just to give you a bit of information about what the team can and can't do. So what we can't do is we're not clinical in the team, so we're admin staff, so we can't give you any clinical information. We're not medically trained. We can't provide any advice on conditions that you're going through, and we're unlikely to have experience on medical conditions that you might be going through, or whether you can. There's treatments that can be available in the NHS. That would be down for like our providers to respond, you know, and give you that clinical information. What we can do is obviously signpost you to appropriate services. We also can't. We're unable to get you a prescription. If for example, a patient was having issues regarding getting their medication, we could contact the GP practice for them and get an update about what the hold up is, but we can't override. So if a GP says we're not in a position to issue that medication, we won't be overriding any of those clinical based decisions. There isn't anybody in the ICB that can override a GP's decision around the medication that's being issued or a referral. We also can't escalate or expedite a referral on behalf of you. We can signpost you to our partners, and we can ask you to contact them, but it certainly isn't something that we can expedite for you on our behalf, on behalf of your case. The only person that could help with that is probably if it was like a GP referral, like a referral onwards, it's probably you can contact your GP practice, have a conversation with them and just explain how you're feeling, and then they can write to the provider and for them to make a decision. Ultimately, these are kind of, again, it's about clinical based decisions, and there isn't anybody that can override them. We can't arrange appointments, so we can phone up and say a patient's contacted us and they're unable to get an appointment. Is there anything you can do to help with that? But we can't insist that they give an appointment on that particular day at that particular time. So a lot of our work, I think Catherine passed on that as well, is like, you know, trying to resolve things informally. So we might be able to kind of pick things up, have a conversation with the providers. We work a lot on that with our relationship with them and trying to resolve things as quickly as possible for the patient. We don't have access to patient information either. So we don't know, we wouldn't know what GP practice you're registered with. We're not able to see any of your information unless it's shared with us as part of a complaints process. But ordinarily, we wouldn't have access to any patient records because they are managed directly by the GP practice. They are the data controller and they're responsible for all the records that they hold on behalf of patients. For complaints, we get complaints in around staff that work in our GP or any of our providers. Just to explain, we don't actually employ any of those staff. So the admin staff that work at our providers, they are actually employed by those individual organisations. So again, while a patient has the opportunity to respond directly to the Commissioner, it's just worth noting that we won't be able to ensure that the provider, like we can't say that the person needs to be, they need to take a formal process or anything like that. So we don't actually employ them. All of our providers are independent contractors, which means they're self-employed, and therefore any staff that work in those providers, they are the people that pay their wages. They have an overall contract that they are in business with us, but we don't actually employ the staff. So that's why if you contact the team and say that you have a complaint about a practice staff, we're likely to ask you to move that to the practice, because we can send the complaint to the provider for them to respond, but we can't get you a better resolution from the outcome of that complaint. If you need assistance in putting complaints together, you can contact the advocacy service. I know their details will be shared on the website, and currently, as Catherine mentioned, it's currently Rethink, and we might signpost you to those services if we think you need some assistance with putting a complaint letter together. The other thing is that, just to let you know, that we can't reinvestigate a complaint. So if you've gone to a practice and you've already complained directly to them, you can't take the complaint then to us. Okay, if you're unhappy with the response, you'd have to take it to the Ombudsman. If it's been resolved, try to be resolved informally. That isn't necessarily through the formal complaints process. So if you phoned up a GP practice, say for example, you wanted paracetamol, just use that as an example, and the GP practice said no, and you wasn't able to get a resolution for that, you can make a complaint to the practice asking them, to give a reason why that decision was made. But if you wasn't happy with that response, you can't then come to the ICB and ask us to reinvestigate the issues. Okay, there is only 2 stages to the complaints procedure, which is one for the provider to respond, and then if you're unhappy, you'd have to go to the Ombudsman or the Commissioner, sorry. You'd have the option to go to the Commissioner and ask them to forward it to the complaint to the provider. That's the other thing as well is, sorry, I haven't written this on this, but we don't actually do investigations with the provider complaints. It would go to whatever provider it is, because under the complaint regulations, the complaint regulations say that whoever the complaint has been made against has to have an opportunity to respond to the concerns, and therefore the complaint would go out to that provider, GP practice, optician, pharmacist, dentist, and they would have an opportunity to respond. We do have a review process in place for a clinical complaint, and that would be somebody independent, and they'll look at your complaint, they'll look at the practice response, and they will look at the medical records, and they will then, and we'll give you a cover letter on regards to that. So I think that's it. I don't think I had anything else, did I, on my slides?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, Dawn. I think we're now going to hear from Alicia Howell, who is the Head of Patient Experience at Homerton Hospital. Over to you, Alicia.
Hello. Let me just try and share my slides. Is that showing? I can't see anyone's face. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see them. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. So I'm just going to talk a little bit through complaints handling and what happens at the Homerton. So I first thought it'd be helpful to just decipher the difference between a concern and a complaint, because often patients will say they're raising a complaint, but we have 2 different ways of dealing with patient concerns at the Homerton. So patient concerns usually will go down the PALS route, and then we have formalised complaints. So the difference between them are that concerns tend to be more informal issues that can be resolved without a formal investigation, and they can normally be resolved relatively quickly, and they don't normally require a formal written response, whereas a complaint is usually a bit more serious, will be handled via the formal complaints procedure, and is likely to take a bit longer to resolve. So from a PALS perspective, we can receive concerns, generic feedback, compliments, or requests for advice. But again, just like Dawn was saying, we are not a clinical service, so we can't offer any clinical advice or information from that perspective. What we do is try and aim to respond to our patients within a 3 to 5 working day. However, there isn't an actual governed response from an NHS perspective. And we are a support service only for the patients. So things like GPs, they'll have to do clinician to clinician conversations. So from a complaints perspective, we have a complaints officer that would need to acknowledge a formal complaint that comes in, and we are governed by the NHS complaints response timeline, and the complaints officers will support with collating that information and then sending it on to the services for them to do an investigation. And then the complaints officers will send out reminders to the service to ensure that they respond in a timely manner. So to just give you a bit of a ballpark, on an average day, we probably get around 10 phone calls, 3 to 6 face-to-faces, 40 emails or 1 to 2 letters. So on average, we probably get about 50 inquiries, because some of these numbers go up and down a little bit. But we have 2 complaints officers, so that can still be quite a lot of inquiries that we have to respond to per day. So on average, we get about 60 new complaints a month, which is about 720 a year. As the former 2 speakers have said, we are trying to informally resolve as much as we can from the beginning. So we will always try and endeavour to contact the complainant, give an apology over the phone, online or in person, and try and work with the services to resolve that concern as soon as we can. So we have 3 timelines that we follow. So 10 working days if it's an informal complaint, something that we can kind of de-escalate down and address without needing a formal response. Then we have our standard, which most of our complaints will fall into, which is a 30 working day response rate. And that's normally when it's investigated by a single provider, i.e. us, and you will have a formal response in writing. And then 60 working days if it's a complex complaint or a serious incident complaint. So a complaint that can involve 2 providers where we might need to work in tandem with someone, or if it is a serious incident that needs a formal and further investigation before we'd be able to finalise what the response would be. So as I said before, most of ours we try and turn around in 30 working days, and we try and give the divisions around 17 working days to get those responses done, and then a little bit of time for the execs to review, and then the CEO can sign off. Some complaints do come in over 12 months. Typically, we cannot respond to complaints that come in over 12 months old, but we do have to look at every case by case and decide whether we feel that there's a good reason why the delay happened, or whether we should consider the complaint based upon other reasons. But if it is found that actually it's timed out, sometimes we will have to respond and just explain that we might not be able to respond to the complaint or respond to it in full. So if we have multiple providers, then either us or the other organisation will become effectively the host provider, and they will do the most of the investigation. Then if we are the host, we will collate the information from another organisation and put it together, or vice versa, we will give information. On some occasions, you might be required to do separate complaint responses, and the complainant should be notified of that. So in the complaint journey, there's 3 different steps. So we acknowledge, then we investigate, then we respond. So in an acknowledgement, we want to try and get that done within 3 working days, but we aim for 2 in our trust, and will normally be done in some form of writing, whether it be a letter or via email. On some occasions, we'll do it verbally, but not very often. And it must include an offer to discuss the handling and offer a time frame for which we will respond to that concern. We'll also just check that the summary of what we think the concerns raised are about, to just make sure that the complainant is also happy with that. And then we will start the process of getting consent if we need to then send it on to the divisions. And we do have some services that can support in helping to construct a complaint if need be. Then the investigation, we select someone in the trust who will carry out the investigation, and they will then discuss with all relevant members of staff or services, look into clinical notes or CCTV footage, discussion with complainant if need be, review our policies and procedures just before they can respond. Then they will do the response, where we have a template draft to try and formalise the process, where the service will then get the original complaint and a synopsis of the main points, and then be given the timeline in which it will be returned to. So we try and operate in a manner of called keep calm. So we try and make sure that our responses are compassionate, answer all the questions, they're in layman's terms, and that they are meaningful apologies that we give. And for our learning, we will feedback to teams when complaints have come in so that we can make meaningful changes in our services and review current practices and procedures. We try to address conduct, behaviours and cultures within our services. Where needed, get more training and development opportunities for teams, use it as an opportunity for quality improvement and greater understanding of our processes and our services. So a few things we've done as a response to some complaints that have come in. We have made a new maternity wishes booklet, which looks at birthing preferences of birthing people and tries to adhere to that as much as possible. It also incorporates the new birthing plan within that to try and encourage people to have conversations earlier about their preferences around care, to help manage expectations. It also gives some information about what to expect when you come onto the ward areas and what to expect when you are having your care within the Homerton. We've also done complaints training, which is starting to be launched now, trust-wide, where we are training on 2 different levels, everyone in the trust around complaint handling and responses, so that everyone is aware of the complaints process. We got a therapy dog for the trust to support with staff and patient wellbeing. We have been doing a lot of work on our living values, where our teams have been going around the different services to really just remind people of our values and what we've agreed to adhere to, managing culture and getting feedback in terms of what things can impact that on a day-to-day basis. We have invested in civility and customer service training for our staff. And recently on our children's ward Starlight, we have got a Shabbos cupboard from feedback around there not being kosher food available around the clock for people. So some questions that we get, what if a patient wants compensation? There is a separate process for managing compensation, so we will let you know how to make a claim outside of the formal complaint. What if as a trust we've made the mistake? Then we do operate in transparency and honesty, and we will speak to the complainant and ask how they'd like to proceed. What if we receive a complaint that's older than 12 months? I already went over that before, but we just need to consider if there's any extenuating circumstances which would warrant why we would respond after that time. And if we can, then we will. If we can't respond in full, sometimes we can still support with signposting and things like that, and we'll endeavour to support as much as we can. What if we miss a complaint deadline? We will send out holding letters or email to the patient to explain the reason for delay, and then aim to give them a time frame in which we'll respond by. And what if the team members in question are no longer here or they're off? We use information that we do have. So often that comes from clinical notes, but we're also transparent with our complainants. If we have unanswered questions that only that person would be able to answer, then we will explain that there's some areas that we wouldn't be able to comment on or answer in full. And then information on how to contact us. I can share this afterwards so you can get that if you want, but we do have a website page on the internet. So if you just type in Homerton Complaint Service, it will come up, and all this information is also on that website. And then just any questions if anybody had any. And that was all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. I love the presentation and how you address some FAQs that actually answer some of the questions that have been coming to my private chat. I'm gonna open up to questions now, and there are a couple that have been asked that I think can be answered by all our participants. So one of the questions is about support for people who don't speak English as their first language. What support is available if you have a patient who wants to make a complaint but English is their not first language? I think we'll come to you first, Dawn, and then I'll come to you, Alicia.
So what we would do is we would signpost to our advocacy services if we've got somebody that needs support. We've checked with Rethink and they've advised us that they have support in place for that. The ICB doesn't actually. It has it has translation services available for our providers, but not actually for our complaints team. So what we would do is we would signpost them to our advocacy services and ask them to support the patient with making a complaint if English wasn't their first language.
Thank you. And I'll come to you, Alicia, now, please.
I think it's a similar response that we have. We have advocacy services as well. We also can get someone to come in to translate if that person can wait to make that complaint. So we can always arrange that for patients as well to support. Also online, sometimes there are conversion languages, so you can put your complaint in, and on some websites it will allow you to convert on the website, depending on where you're sending it to. So we are looking into something we can put on our website that would be able to help with the translation links in the future. But there's also lots of other services that will support. So even like your local parliament and people like that, they can also help to support you in constructing your complaint and wording it the best way for you.
Thank you, Alicia. Colin, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? Colin, I don't know if you can hear me. I can see that you have your hand up. You're welcome to come off mute and ask your question.
Maybe put the question in the chat if you're not able to do that.
Okay, while we wait for Toyin to type her question, another question, the person is saying, just out of curiosity, what are the complaints that you received most often? So what do people complain about?
Oh, if Felicia's okay, I'll go first. So people normally complain to the ICB is around like access to appointments, clinical care, and access to like referrals and medication. So that's most of our complaints that we receive. That's the themes and trends that we see most of.
Thank you, Dawn. What about you, Alicia?
I think some of the things that we're going to say is quite similar. Appointments is a high one on everyone's list at the moment, just because everywhere is inundated. We're still struggling with the backlog from COVID, and unfortunately, a lot of patients are not feeling like that's a good enough excuse anymore. So we do get a lot of feedback and complaints around appointment handling, especially when we had the strikes kind of earlier this year and last year. That caused a lot of disruption to the appointments, and a lot of things had to be moved and cancelled just to ensure our patients were safe, really. But actually, if you've been waiting a really long time for an appointment, that is really, really frustrating for a lot of people. So we get a lot of complaints around that. And then also just experience on the wards and when they have care. Often the actual care people have received, they're very happy with, but it's the in-between bits around whether it's communication between their flow in the hospital, whether it's around their discharge, or whether it's around interactions that they've had whilst they've been having their care. So those are kind of the main subjects that we get.
Thank you, Alicia. Toyin, do you want to ask your question now? I can see you're off mute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is really for Alicia. You said there's a 12-month limit kind of on how far back you can go, but what if the issue is older than 12 months and is effectively still going on? Like whatever happened, I don't know. You've been waiting 4 years and you're still waiting 4 years, and it's all because of a series of errors that keep happening. Like they've lost your file, they forgot about you, they cancel your appointment, and something that should have happened 4 years ago, should have happened 3 years ago, should have happened 2 years ago. They kept saying, sorry, oh yeah, sorry. And so you want to complain now? Would that be 4 years old complaint, or would that be a 1 year old complaint?
So if things are still existing, then it's still happening in real time. So that wouldn't be something that you would count as being timed out. Some people's timeline is a long timeline, but it's how current is the situation. So for example, if you had a baby 15 years ago and then wrote into the Homerton today to say, I had a baby 15 years ago and I don't know, Nurse Sarah forgot to give me my antibiotics, we probably wouldn't be able to comment too strongly on that, because Nurse Sarah may not be in our trust anymore. It's very difficult to ascertain what actually happened 15 years ago, because that's a really long timeline, and it's not current. If you said I had a baby 15 years ago and since then I've been having ongoing issues and I've been to the GP many times and I've had surgery and things are still not going, that's an ongoing thing. It may have started back then 15 years ago, but actually the symptoms and issues you're having are still ongoing. I hope that kind of clears it up.
Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you.
Dawn, please.
Yes, sorry, just to clarify that. So what Alicia was talking about the timescale, that is across the board for NHS complaints. So that's written in the complaint regulations about the 12-month timeline. Sorry, I didn't comment on that, but actually Alicia made a really good point. So, and what I would say is whatever organisation gets that in, they would always look at that complaint and see whether they think it's something that can be looked into. I mean, for example, if you was complaining about a GP practice and you wanted to complain about a particular entry that was made in your notes 15 years ago, it's unlikely that we will be able to get a response for you on that, because people move on and times change. And so it would be unlikely that we would accept a complaint. We could send it to the practice, we can, and we would say to you in some circumstances to contact the GP practice. Maybe I'm just talking about them because most of our complaints are about GP providers, and ask them to kind of look into the issues. But the 12-month timeline that we're talking about isn't just something that we've just put together. It's actually in the complaint regulations, and it's something that, and the complaint regulations is a statutory instrument. It's been passed through Parliament, so it's actually a lawful document. It's not something that NHS organisations have made up. The timescale is different from various organisations. Like for primary care complaints, we don't have that timescale of needing to respond within 25 working days or whatever the timescale is. It's normally a local decision, but the actual timeline for when patients have got to bring a complaint is actually been written in, sort of in a document, in a legal document that's been passed through Parliament.
Thank you, Dawn. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I think it's time to close the meeting. So I wanted to thank you, Catherine Perez-Phillips, Dawn Freeman, and Elisa Howell for joining us today. I am going to share the recording with all of you who registered, and thank to you all as well for joining today. And I will also share a link to our YouTube channel where you will find not just this recording, but also our other information exchange meetings. I hope you have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank